All right, while they're getting their picture taken, we will start introducing the next panel. And another area that is really leveling the playing field so that we can have these opportunities in every part of the state is broadband. And as a pillar of Envision 2026, the Montana Chamber's 10-year strategic plan, infrastructure, including broadband, is recognized as an essential to promoting economic growth across the entire state. So next up for our panel will be the General Manager of Broadband Montana, Bridger Malum. He'll be joining us today and with air and rail representatives. And please welcome our next panel.
Well, hello everybody. Like Nancy said, my name's Bridger Malum, General Manager, Broadband Montana. I just joined them in March, so I still get to play the new guy card for a little while. We'll see how long the board gives me for that. But yeah, just thrilled to be here. Again, Broadband Montana, real quick. We represent Montana's locally owned, community-based broadband service providers, and we collectively employ over 1,000 Montanans throughout the state and invest over $100 million in capital expenditures and operating expenditures every year. So we're excited about the role we play in the If You Build It, We Will Come theme. But of course, this isn't just about me, and it shouldn't be, because we have planes and trains. And I think we had somebody from automobiles at some point, but I think he's driving Steve Martin home, so you're stuck with us. And I guess all jokes aside, of course, as well as I landed that last one, it's my pleasure to introduce our two panelists who are joining me today. First, we have Brian Springer with Bozeman Yellowstone International Airport. He's been president and CEO there since 2009. Thank you so much for being here. And further to my right here, we have French Thompson. He's the General Director of Public Infrastructure Investments with BNSF Railway. So really, really appreciate the perspectives that the two of you are going to bring to us today. And I think I want to start first with you, Brian. I mean, you joined the airport in 1999, I believe, right?
That's correct.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then, of course, as I just mentioned, you've been in your current role for at least for 15 years now. Can you tell us a bit about the last 20 years or so for the airport? What have been some of the growth strategies that you've employed to get it to where it is today?
Well, really, our goal is access. Pretty much, if we can provide access for our community to find the rest of the world, or the rest of the world to find us, that's what we're really trying to provide. When I first started with the airport 25 years ago, we had 4 nonstop destinations. One of those was Butte. So we've gone a little bit past that over the past few years. In essence, we're handling about five times the passengers than what we did when I started 25 years ago. So it's grown a lot, and obviously infrastructure has been a big part of that. We've had multiple terminal expansions. We've added a runway. And it's just part of the process to be able to try and keep up with the changes that are certainly part of the Gallatin Valley and southwest Montana.
Oh, thanks, Brian. And French, for you looking back a little bit, so you've been, I believe, with BNSF for about 18 years, several roles, and now you're in this current one. And kind of looking back a little bit, talk to us about BNSF's presence in Montana and the importance that Montana is to BNSF moving goods out of the state and through the state.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. So most of you all probably know that BNSF had several predecessor railroads, namely in Montana, the Great Northern and the Northern Pacific. And so ultimately the Great Northern followed Highway 2 or vice versa. And then the Northern Pacific came across the southern route, essentially with Highway 90. And that was over 170 years ago. The first transcontinental railroads across the north connecting Chicago to the Pacific Northwest. And so as we've grown, Montana's been in the middle of it. You know, the governor talked about the ag economy and how that is a big piece of what we do coming in and out of Montana, as well as other products that are either being manufactured or consumed by Montanans or vice versa being shipped out. So it's a significant piece of what we do. It's at the heart of what we call our Northern Transcon, getting from the center part of the country to the west, and then ultimately that has probably say that the cherry on top there is over the last 2 years we've reintegrated the Montana Rail Link into the BNSF family because of all of the volume that we're growing in and out of Montana, and that just kind of puts a fine point on what Montana means to BNSF.
Yeah, and even just even looking, online at your website, you do a great job of breaking out what your presence is in every state. You have nearly 2,300 employees employed throughout the state. So just really appreciate your presence here, and that's just one of just many great economic factors that BNSF has brought.
If you want me to give stats, I can give stats. But I mean, we have over 3,000 employees in the state of Montana, over 3,000 miles in terms of what we operate through here. And it's great. When you think about it, we're in every major city in Montana and most small cities as well when you think about it along those corridors. And everyone that's here, it's because they want to live and work in Montana. So we talked about the work ethic, et cetera, the opportunity to have people here. And I mean, I live in Fort Worth now, but I would probably say on my floor, probably 25 to 30% of the people that are in engineering leadership at BNSF have all either started in Montana or have worked through Montana, and it's just a big piece of what we do.
Oh, excellent. Well, and it sounds like my figure there was outdated, so even more than 3,000 now. That's wonderful. And I guess at the risk of bringing up another outdated figure, Brian, turning back to you, I'd heard at one point just recently that the Bozeman International Airport is responsible for at least 42% of travelers that are leaving Montana. So it has to be the largest volume for traffic in the state of Montana. So just thinking about the role that you play in people coming in and out of this state and participating in the economy, talk to us a bit about where you see the airport in the next 20 years or so and how important this has been to the economic growth of the region.
Sure. Well, we haven't always been the busiest airport in the state, so that's only happened in the past about 11 years. So we've been really focused on, trying to grow the infrastructure for that. We have 9 airlines now with service to 25 destinations to basically all 3 coasts. There aren't a lot of low-hanging fruit destinations left. And so when we're looking into the future, we're really filling in the gaps and actually starting the process to potentially bring in international flights to Southwest Montana from Europe. Now that's a 10 to 15 year project. So it's when we talk about airline routes and such, it's a marathon. It's not a race.
And just in a little bit of an aside here, Brian, I saw the East Terminal construction project. Can you enlighten us a bit on that's going to be a big deal coming up in the next few years for the airport, is it not?
Yeah, it's overall we've got about $180 million terminal project coming up. That will actually create the space for future customs. We'll reserve it for that. We won't have a need for it for some time, but you have to create the space to be ready for when that happens. We'll expand 3 additional gates. We'll have a true 3 carousels for baggage claim instead of the baggage claim that we have right now. And when we're looking at all of the infrastructure for the airport, that's only about half of the infrastructure that we'll be building in the next really 6 years. We've got another $200 million worth of airfield infrastructure that we're doing as well.
Well, I think just the examples that we're hearing here are just it's demonstrating how much this economy is exploding in the state, and these are just two ways to demonstrate that. And so, French, turning back to you, you mentioned a little bit about the relationship that's really important to have between the railroads and the communities in which they operate and serve. Can you tell us a bit, especially in the role that you play with the company, why it's important for communities on the BNSF network to work with the railroad as they grow, like we've discussed?
Yeah, great question. First, I want to thank you for expanding the airport, 3 nonstop flights, and they were all full coming up here. So you guys are doing a great job. But in my role at BNSF, I'm responsible for working with all of our communities in our 23 states and 3 Canadian provinces in regards to any infrastructure that they want to develop in, on, or around us. And then vice versa, where BNSF has infrastructure that intersects a community that maybe we want to expand, maybe there's things that we want to make modifications on, then my team is chief out there with our public affairs team to work with them to negotiate, make those things happen. And so when it comes to our partnership with communities, it's extremely important to have this relationship to say, we're all in this together. We are moving goods, we are moving people in terms of Amtrak, but in terms of goods movement and people movement on the roadway network, that is important as well. And most people only think about railroads when it comes to an at-grade crossing, right? When they're sitting there, be it at a yield sign, everyone's laughing, everyone thinks about that, right? Or the lights and gates are down and you're sitting there wondering when this train is going to go by. And with that, since that's the primary way that people engage with the railroad, then it's extremely important that we make that, in as much as possible, a positive experience. The train is coming. Everyone has an Amazon package waiting for them sometime today. And those things are moving by rail. But what we do is, one, to try to improve grade crossing safety, try to figure out ways to mitigate that intersection between the public and the railroad, and then in some cases find a way to invest to be able to separate that, right? Can we build an overpass or an underpass? Can we build connecting roadways to allow for growing communities to be able to still intersect and live with the railroads, and then vice versa, as we continue to grow, how do we minimize our impact on the locals? So those are a lot of things that we do along the way, and there's some specificity behind it that we can get into.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I mean, if any of you have some more specifics, I mean, I know we've got some time. Feel free to share.
Yeah, I mean, so in several ways, right? We think about investment in infrastructure, and as communities grow, we've spoken this whole summit about the growth in Montana. Well, you think about it, in several of these areas, most of these areas where the conductor and engineer would just go down the road, pass by Farmer John's ranch, that's all they saw for 30 years. And then the next day, Farmer John decided to sell his ranch, and now there are 500 rooftops there, where all those people want to get from one place to another. And guess what? Farmer John only had one crossing, because that's all he needed to get from one field to the next. But now I have 500 people that need to get to the grocery store, need to get to Target or wherever else they're going. And that becomes a tension point. And so how do we work with those communities? Either it is through partnership with that local HOA or local county government or municipality, or with the state, with the Montana DOT. They invest in significant infrastructure as well. And then where maybe that opportunity isn't there, we then look at the federal government and say, hey, are there opportunities to leverage infrastructure funding that is out there to lower the burden on the local communities to fund the infrastructure that helps not only them get to where they need to go, but it reduces the impact that the railroad has on them.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, French. So Brian, you had teased a bit about the international flights that we're about to get. Super exciting. We're going to hold you to it.
I'll be back in 15 years.
Excellent. But kind of on that note, and I've just personally been fascinated by how this all works, and I'd love for you to take us under the tent when it comes to the process of securing a new route from a major airline. What goes into that?
Well, the first thing is you have to have a market for it. I think there's a predisposition that I'd like a flight to Paducah. You got to have the people first. And the airlines have just an unusual amount of data that they evaluate every single route. And, for us here, we have a hidden advantage, particularly in southwest Montana, and that is we have the gateway of tourism. And when we look at trying to get a new route, we have an advantage over almost every community in the country because we can have the airline try with 1 day a week service in one season. And when they try that, they eventually start looking at expanding that. So when we go after airline service, we have to have a market. We have to have an airline that's willing. We have to have a destination that the airline's willing to fly to, and then we have to have a community that's going to back it. And the tourism community actually backs airline service much more easily because they depend on it. And so when we've gone after airline service, out of our 12 year-round destinations that we have, 8 of those started in the last 20 years at 1 day a week or less. I mean, it might be just 1 day a week for a season. And so those are now all daily year-round service, including places like Atlanta, which is a long ways away. LA, San Francisco. Our up-and-coming route that's going to be probably daily in the next, I would say, 2 to 3 years is New York. It started out 1 day a week 12 years ago. If we are able to achieve that on a year-round basis, we will be the smallest community west of the Mississippi to have year-round daily service to New York City by a lot. And so that access, really is trying to, provide that access, but the tourism community really gave us the ability to try something, and the airlines were able to expand it over the years. And so we're fortunate in this area because one round trip from New York to Bozeman cost the airline almost $80,000. They don't want to do that at a loss. So, that's a lot of the background that happens in just, securing new airline service.
Sure, and like the support from the community too, like you mentioned, like tourist organizations that also pooling together resources to help the airline justify the expense.
Yeah, they're backstopping. So if the airline didn't make that $80,000, the community often will have to, be the risk mitigation to make sure that the airline is able to do it at not having a loss and ideally making a profit, because in the airline world, we are competing against every other place that the airline could put that aircraft. So if they choose to put it into Montana, and believe me, we're a successful airport in Montana, but we're not the only one. We have better air service in every community in this state than pretty much all the rest of the country for population our size. And we are convincing the airlines to bring the airplane here because we need air travel and air access because we are one heck of a long ways from anywhere.
Well, and segueing back to you, French, and thinking about investment and using different strategies to do it. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this because public investment's literally in your job title, and was curious. I mean, given what BNSF invests, and it is a tremendous amount to maintain and expand its network, how does public investment factor into the operations of a major freight railroad such as yourself?
Yep. So first, for those that don't know, freight railroads in the United States are privately owned, right? And so for us, we're fortunately wholly owned by Berkshire Hathaway. And as a part of that, that means that we don't leverage public dollars to do what we need to do. So we invest on average $3 to $3.5 billion every year into our infrastructure across the United States. And our railroad is a infrastructure heavy type of operation. Probably for every dollar that we make, we put back 60 cents into the infrastructure because we're an outdoor conveyor belt is the way we like to talk about it. But there are opportunities where a interest that we have or a need to expand that we have, or vice versa, where a public entity or a DOT wants to do a project and that intersection is at the railroad, then it makes sense at times to say, hey, how can we partner to make something better? And so that's part of what my team's job is to look at BNSF's opportunities. Where are we expanding? Where are we investing? And where does that intersection, if you look at a Venn diagram, right, where does that intersection happen with public infrastructure? And the sweet spot is where the Department of Transportation or the county or the city had plans already to do something in that area. And then we say, hey, how can we make that something bigger? Instead of us just putting a second track in or putting in new lights and gates, or for a community, instead of them widening a roadway from 2 lane to 4 lane, what can we do better here to leverage both sets of dollars to do something that is longer standing in terms of that investment? And so that's what we do. Half of it is specifically for safety. We're looking out there to figure out how can we improve safety. I would say that statistically about 50 to 55% of our at-grade crossings do not have active warning devices. I mean, they're not lights and gates. They're just a crossbuck, stop sign, yield sign. And then the others have lights and gates or some other infrastructure associated with it. And so when we look at where incidents and accidents are, you would think that, well, it's at all of the crossings that don't have lights and gates. Well, actually, 65% of our incidents happen at crossings that have lights and gates, right? And so when you think about it, that's because people believe that, one, it's typically those roadways have higher volume, but also people believe, oh, I see the lights and gates coming. That means I know when the train is coming. I can time it. I'll get around it. And so what we try to do is then engineer out stupid and then try to find more ways to increase safety. And so that's probably we invest between BNSF and our public partners over about $150 million a year in grade crossing safety alone. And then you look at, I would call it growth opportunities. Those are your overpasses, underpasses, quiet zones, quality of life improvements, in which we like to call it. And when you look at those investments that are made by public agencies to modify in and around us, you can see somewhere around $400 to $500 million a year that are invested to make those things happen. So that's what our team looks at and finds opportunities to make that happen.
Great. And briefly, Brian, do you have anything you want to add from the airport's perspective about growth opportunities? And just given that safety is such an important part of infrastructure, what else do you have to add for that?
You know, I want to reiterate the importance of, what French has been saying is if you look at the East Belgrade interchange, that was a very big project that involved Montana DOT, involved the airport, the county, the city of Belgrade, and the railroad. It was very advantageous for all of us to get that done, and that was actually the first basically locally funded interchange project in the state of Montana. So that meant we did not use state money. We did use some federal money, but we didn't use state money. It was all locally funded and contributions from like the railroad. And I can't imagine our community now, especially Belgrade, operating without, a non-at-grade crossing. It was just a very important thing for all of us in Southwest Montana. And, as the airport, it certainly is a big thing, but I think it's even more so for the community, Central Valley Fire, everything that we can think of that just, came about because of the cooperation with the railroad and everyone else.
Oh, appreciate the insights, gentlemen. We might have I think we have a couple minutes. Maybe we can get one question or two in. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask these experts that I have up here with me?
I'll ask a question.
Rich? I'll just pass it over to you.
So my question, you both can answer, but lots of bridges all across the United States, right? But I mean, probably more for French than for Brian. So can you talk a little bit about, maybe it's not your bailiwick, but sort of what's BNS thinking and thoughts about both maintaining, replacing, and improving infrastructure, especially around bridges?
Yep, no, great question. We have over 14,000 bridges across BNSF, and there are requirements by the Federal Railroad Administration on how often we need to inspect those. So they have a minimum of 1 year in supervised inspection, which is actually twice as frequent as your DOT bridges, your highway bridges. And then we have a fully dedicated team that inspects those even beyond that timeline. And we spend probably somewhere about $250 million a year on modifying, replacing, rehabbing bridges. We build our bridges to last, so there are still some structures out here that are 100 plus years old. that still have probably another 30, 40-year lifespan in them. But as a part of those inspection processes, we then put together a priority matrix on these are the ones that need to be addressed immediately. And we go down that list every year. And when we think about that $3.5 billion, our leadership team never cuts anything in terms of our structures. Bridges don't matter until they're not there, right? And so those are crucial pieces of what we do. And so we invest a lot in those.
Oh, thank you. I think we'd have time for one more over here.
Hi, this is for French. What about, I've heard a little bit of noise about passenger rail on BNSF across southern part of Montana. Can you speak to that at all?
Yep, so passenger rail, so 1970s, the freight railroads divested themselves of passenger rail and gave it over to Amtrak or to local operators to determine. There is interest now federally. There's a corridor ID program in which the FRA allows for communities or interested parties to say, hey, I want to start up a new rail corridor. And then they go through a process of what they call a service development plan. It's actually not that much different than trying to start a new route with an airline. You have to have the destinations. You have to have justification for the route. You have to have people that are going to ride it and to make it viable. And so when you go through that process, then you have to figure out the money. And it's quite expensive to operate a rail line, especially passenger, because you all don't want to pay what it costs to actually run a rail line. And so really from our piece right now, there is interest in it. There are 13 new corridors that have been identified as interest on BNSF, and they are all going through the FRA's corridor ID process. And what comes out of that is a determination, is this a viable corridor or not? The next step is how you're going to fund it. So we're just waiting and seeing and letting the feds do their thing.
Gentlemen, it's been an honor sharing the stage with you today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Back to you, Nancy.
Thank you, Bridger and panel. Trains, planes, and automobiles, one of my favorite things. One of my favorite memories is a picture I took. I was on a Burlington Northern trip negotiating on a train, and we were going down the Columbia, and there was a barge on the Columbia, and we were in the train, and there's the interstate right next to it full of trucks delivering goods. The only thing that would have made that picture better was to have a plane in the sky. So, and I will say that our friends in the trucking industry, today is the Montana Trucking Association's annual meeting in Billings, and so that's why they weren't on the panel today. So we wish them luck with their association meetings as well.